I was standing on the shoulder of Highway 71 with a blown tire when a mechanic in grease-stained coveralls said something that made me question my entire marriage. I thought I was just waiting for roadside assistance. But that moment changed everything. Sometimes fate doesn't call ahead. It just pulls up behind you with a wrench and a smile you weren't ready for. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 42 years old and I live in Austin, Texas. I'm a VP of marketing for a mid-sized software company. The kind of title that impresses people at cocktail parties but means absolutely nothing when you're lying awake at 3 a.m, wondering where your life went. I've been married to Catherine for 14 years. No children. We never got around to it, which is what people say when the truth is too uncomfortable to speak out loud. We live in a beautiful craftsman home in the Zilker neighborhood. The kind of house that photographs well for Christmas cards, exposed brick, original hardwood floors, a backyard with string lights that we never turn on anymore. From the outside, it looks like a life. From the inside, it feels like a museum exhibit of something that used to be real. I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror that morning before everything changed. Salt and pepper hair, neatly trimmed, but surrendering to gray at the temples. A well-groomed beard, more gray than I'd like to admit. Brown eyes that used to be warm but had grown tired over the years. I was wearing a simple white V-neck, expensive but understated. The uniform of a man who wants to look casual while still maintaining control of something. Anything. I tried to remember the last time I felt truly alive. I couldn't. Catherine and I had become two people, sharing a house, but living in different zip codes. Our marriage was a series of logistics, shared calendars, polite dinners, separate bedrooms disguised as different sleep schedules. We hadn't touched each other in months. We hadn't really talked in years. Successful on paper, I told myself. Bankrupt in every way that matters. That morning we'd had a fight. Not the explosive kind, just the cold, surgical kind that leaves you bleeding without any visible wounds. She told me I was never present. I didn't argue, I couldn't. She was right, and we both knew it. When my phone buzzed with a reminder about a client meeting in Fredericksburg, I grabbed my keys like a man escaping a burning building. The dashboard clock read 2:47 p.m. when it happened. I was somewhere between Austin and Fredericksburg, surrounded by nothing but limestone hills and empty highway. The Texas Hill Country stretched endlessly in both directions, beautiful and completely indifferent to whatever crisis you were carrying. It was 98 degrees. Heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves, turning the road ahead into a mirage. The kind of afternoon where the sky feels closer, heavier, like it's pressing down on you. Then I heard it. That unmistakable thump, thump, thump of rubber shredding against pavement. I pulled onto the shoulder, got out, and walked around to the rear driver's side. The tire was completely destroyed, shredded like something had chewed through it. My phone showed 8% battery. Barely enough to make a call, let alone wait for help. I'd never learned to change a tire, a fact that embarrassed me more than I wanted to admit. 42 years old, VP of a tech company, and I couldn't do something a 16-year-old learns in driver's ed. Catherine would have had something to say about that if she'd been there, but she wasn't. She was never where I needed her to be anymore. I called roadside assistance, gave them my location, and watched my phone die mid-confirmation. Then I waited. I stood there sweating through my shirt, loosening my collar, watching 18-wheelers barrel past without slowing. The heat pressed against my skin. I thought about Catherine, about the fight, about how I'd spent 14 years building a life I didn't recognize anymore. This is exactly how I feel every single day, I thought. Broken down on the side of the road, waiting for someone to come fix me. 20 minutes later, a white service truck appeared on the horizon. Taurus Mobile Mechanics was painted on the side in bold blue letters. It pulled up behind my BMW, gravel crunching under the tires. The driver's door swung open. She stepped out, and my first thought was that she didn't match what I expected. She wasn't some grizzled old mechanic with oil-stained fingers and a cigarette dangling from his lip. She was maybe late 30s, with blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, a few loose strands framing her face. She wore dark coveralls with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, work gloves on her hands. There was grease on her forearm, and she didn't seem to notice or care. She walked toward me with an easy stride, no hurry despite the heat, carrying a wrench like it was an extension of her arm. There was something about the way she moved, confident, unhurried, like she'd already assessed the situation and found it entirely manageable. She crouched by the tire, ran her hand along the shredded rubber, and looked up at me with bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to be sizing me up and finding me mildly amusing. "Well," she said, "looks like you found the one pothole in Texas that doesn't have a warning sign." I laughed. Actually laughed. A sound that surprised me because I couldn't remember the last time I'd made it. "How long you been waiting?" she asked, already pulling out her jack. "About 20 minutes. Phone died." "Classic." She positioned the jack under the frame. "Did you hear anything before the blowout? Grinding, thumping?" "Just the explosion." She nodded, not looking up. "These run flats give out fast when they go. No warning." I watched her work, struck by how competent she was, how completely unbothered by the 98-degree heat or the fact that she was crouched on scorching asphalt. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and could do it 1,000 more without breaking a sweat. I stepped forward. "Can I help with anything?" She waved me off without looking up. "Just stay out of the sun. You look like you're about to melt." "Fair enough." "So what do you do?" she asked, loosening the lug nuts with practiced ease. "When you're not stranded on Highway 71? "Marketing, VP at a software company." "Fancy." "Not really." She glanced at me, just a flicker, and I got the sense she heard what I didn't say. Something about the way she listened made me feel like I was being heard for the first time in years. "Where were you headed?" "Client meeting, Fredericksburg." "Important?" I paused. "I don't know anymore." She didn't respond to that, but the corner of her mouth twitched, like she understood exactly what I meant. 15 minutes later, the spare was on. She stood up, wiped her hands on a rag she'd pulled from her back pocket, and gave me the rundown. "Spare's solid, but get a real replacement within the week. Don't push it over 65. "Got it. Thank you." I reached for my wallet, and that's when her eyes drifted to my left hand, specifically to my wedding band. She paused. A half smile played at her lips, knowing, amused, completely unbothered. "If you weren't married," she said, "I'd take you for a ride, and I don't mean in that car." I froze. The words hit me like a gust of wind on a still day. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. My face flushed. From the heat, I told myself, and I managed something like, "Thank you." She just grinned, completely unruffled, and handed me the invoice. "Drive safe, flat tire guy. That spare won't last forever." She climbed back into her truck, gave me a two-finger wave through the window, and pulled onto the highway. I watched until the white truck disappeared into the shimmer of the heat. Her words echoed in my head. "If you weren't married." I looked down at my wedding ring. Really looked at it. The gold had worn thin in places. 14 years on my finger, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually seen it. It wasn't the flirtation that stuck with me, it was the assumption. She assumed my ring meant something. That I was someone's. That my marriage was real. Standing there on that scorching highway shoulder, sweat dripping down my back, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd assumed the same thing. I got back in my car, drove the rest of the way to Fredericksburg, made the meeting, smiled at the right moments, said the right things, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not her face, though I remembered that too. Not the flirtation, though it played on a loop in my head. I kept thinking about the way she looked at me, like I was someone worth seeing. That night I came home to an empty house. Catherine was at a work dinner. The kitchen was dark. The living room was silent. I poured myself a whiskey, sat in my chair without turning on the lights, and stared at the ring on my finger until the ice melted. A stranger on the side of the road had seen me more clearly in 20 minutes than my wife had in 14 years. I didn't know it yet, not consciously, but something had cracked open inside me that afternoon. A fissure in the wall I'd built around a life I didn't recognize anymore. 3 days later, I'd discover the truth about my marriage. 2 weeks after that, I'd see Elena Torres again. But that night, all I knew was that something had shifted, and there was no going back. 3 days later, I came home early from work. That alone should tell you something was off. I hadn't left the office before 7 in years. But that afternoon, my mind kept drifting. Back to the highway, back to the heat. Back to a woman with grease on her forearm and a smile that suggested she knew things about me I hadn't figured out yet. I pulled into the driveway around 5:30. Catherine's car was already there, which surprised me. She usually had meetings or client dinners that kept her out until 9 or 10. The house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. Then I heard the shower running upstairs. I set my keys on the counter, loosened my tie, and that's when I noticed her phone sitting next to the fruit bowl. The screen lit up. A message notification. Then another. Then another. I'd never been the type to snoop. In 14 years of marriage, I'd never once looked through Catherine's phone or emails. I trusted her. Or maybe I just didn't want to know what I'd find if I looked too closely. But something made me pause that evening. Maybe it was Elena's words still rattling around in my head. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at my ring like it was supposed to mean something. Maybe it was 14 years of feeling invisible in my own home, finally demanding some kind of answer. I picked up the phone. The screen showed a thread with someone named David P. David Patterson, Catherine's business partner. They'd worked together for 6 years. He'd been to our house for dinner parties. I'd shaken his hand at company events, made small talk about golf and quarterly projections. The messages were explicit, intimate, unmistakable. Last weekend was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Same hotel next Thursday. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Counting the hours. The timestamps went back over a year. I stood there in my kitchen, phone in hand, reading message after message. Hotel reservations, inside jokes, plans made around my schedule, around the client meetings and work trips that kept me conveniently out of the way. You'd think discovering your wife's affair would feel like a bomb going off, an explosion of rage and betrayal that tears through everything you thought you knew. But for me, it felt more like someone finally turning on the lights in a room I'd been sitting in for years. Everything I'd refused to see was suddenly, painfully visible. The distance between us, the separate bedrooms, the work dinners that went until midnight, the way she'd stopped reaching for me, stopped looking at me, stopped seeing me as anything other than a roommate who paid half the mortgage. It all made sense now. A terrible, clarifying sense. I heard the shower turn off upstairs, footsteps crossing the bedroom. I set the phone back on the counter exactly where I'd found it, and waited. Catherine came downstairs 10 minutes later, dressed for going out, hair still damp. She stopped when she saw me standing in the kitchen. "You're home early," she said. Not a greeting, an observation. "How long has it been going on with David?" Her face went white. I watched the color drain from her cheeks, watched her eyes dart to the phone on the counter, watched her calculate whether denial was even worth attempting. She didn't apologize, didn't cry, didn't try to explain. Instead, she said, "You haven't been here in years, Marcus. Not really." And the worst part? She wasn't entirely wrong. I had checked out, I'd stopped trying, I had buried myself in work and client meetings and quarterly reports, because it was easier than facing the emptiness waiting for me at home every night. But I hadn't betrayed her. I hadn't lied. I hadn't spent a year sneaking around with someone else while pretending our marriage still existed. "I'm going to stay at a hotel tonight," I said. "We can talk about the rest tomorrow." She nodded. No argument, no tears. Just a nod like we were confirming a meeting time. I packed a bag and drove to a motel off I-35. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to feel something. The days that followed were strange. I moved into the guest room for a week, then to a motel downtown. Catherine and I barely spoke except through lawyers. The divorce conversation happened quickly, faster than I'd expected. She didn't fight for the house or the accounts. We divided our lives like a business transaction. Assets, liabilities, clean splits down the middle. No children made it simpler. And sadder somehow. What surprised me most was that I wasn't angry. I kept waiting for the rage to hit, for the betrayal to burn through me and leave me scorched, but it never came. Instead, I felt relieved, and the relief made me feel guilty. I kept waiting to fall apart, but instead I just felt lighter, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't know was there, and someone had finally cut the straps. One night, sitting alone in that motel room, I took off my wedding band for the first time in 14 years. My finger was pale where the ring used to be, a tan line marking territory that no longer belonged to anyone. I held the ring in my palm, turning it over, trying to remember what it had meant when I first put it on. Hope, probably. Promise. The belief that we were building something that would last. I dropped it in the nightstand drawer and didn't look at it again. Elena's words came back to me that night. "If you weren't married?" I wondered what she'd seen that afternoon on the highway. A man worth knowing? Or just another broken guy in an expensive car, pretending everything was fine? I didn't know. but I wanted to find out. 2 weeks after I moved out, I drove to Torres Mobile Mechanics. I'd kept the invoice she'd given me, told myself it was practical in case I needed the receipt for insurance purposes. But the truth was I'd looked at it more than once, traced my finger over the handwritten total, read the shop address until I had it memorized. I told myself I was just going for a vehicle inspection. My car had been making a noise, probably nothing but worth checking. Totally legitimate reason to visit. I was lying to myself, and I knew it. But I went anyway. The garage was on the east side of Austin, tucked away on a street lined with auto shops and welding businesses. 2 service bays, a small cluttered office with a window unit struggling against the heat, and a vintage motorcycle parked out front, burgundy and chrome, gleaming in the afternoon sun. The sign above the door read, "Torres Auto, honest work, fair prices." I parked and walked in, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit them yet. Elena was under a truck when I entered, only her boots visible beneath the chassis. Music played from a small radio on the workbench. Classic rock, something from the 70s. "Be right with you," she called out. Her voice echoed off the concrete floor. She slid out on a mechanic's creeper, wiping her hands on a rag, and looked up. The moment she recognized me, her face broke into a surprised grin. "Flat tire guy." She stood up, still smiling. "Didn't expect to see you again." "My car's been making a noise," I said, the lie sounding weak even to my own ears. "Thought I should get it checked." Elena looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at my left hand, specifically at the pale strip of skin where my ring used to be. "Uh-huh." She grabbed a clipboard from the counter. "Let's take a look." She walked around my BMW, checking things that didn't need checking, popping the hood, glancing at the tires. Professional enough to maintain the pretense, kind enough not to call me out directly. Finally, she straightened up and crossed her arms. "Your car's fine," she said, "but you look like hell." I laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere honest. "That obvious?" "Little bit." She leaned against the workbench, studying me with those sharp, knowing eyes. "What happened?" I don't know why I told her. I barely knew this woman. We'd spent maybe 20 minutes together on the side of a highway, exchanging small talk while she changed my tire. But something about the way she listened, patient, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world, made me want to talk. So I told her everything. Catherine, David, the messages, the motel room, the divorce papers that were probably being drafted at that very moment. Elena didn't interrupt. She just listened, wiping her hands on that same rag, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That explains the missing ring." "Yeah." I looked down at my bare finger. 14 years, gone in a week. "The first month is the worst," she said. "After that, you start remembering who you were before." There was something in her voice, a weight, a familiarity that made me look up. "You sound like you know." "Maybe," she shrugged. "Everyone's got a story." We talked for an hour after that, about nothing and everything. She told me about the shop, how she'd built it from nothing, worked 18-hour days for years to make it what it was. She was sharp and funny and direct in a way that made me feel like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. I left that afternoon feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. 3 weeks later, I found her again. Or maybe the universe found her for me. I'm still not sure which. I'd moved to a different motel by then, a roadside place off Highway 290, cheaper and quieter, with a diner across the parking lot that stayed open until midnight. I couldn't sleep most nights. The silence was too loud, the bed too empty, the thoughts too relentless. At 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, I walked across the lot to the diner, desperate for coffee and something to quiet my mind. I pushed through the door and stopped. Elena was sitting at the counter alone, nursing a cup of coffee and a piece of pie. She looked up, saw me, and laughed. "You're either stalking me," she said, "or the universe has a weird sense of humor." "I'm going with the universe." I slid onto the stool beside her. "What brings you out here?" "Supplier visit. Got hungry. Saw the sign." She gestured at my motel across the lot. "You?" "Temporary housing. Until I figure out something permanent." She nodded, took a bite of pie. "Apple. It's decent." I ordered coffee. We fell into conversation like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, Elena told me about Derek, her ex-husband, a man who'd told her she'd never amount to anything, who said it was embarrassing for his wife to work with her hands, who belittled her dreams of owning a shop until she almost believed he was right. "He said I'd come crawling back," she said, stirring her coffee, "so I sent him a photo of my shop sign instead, framed it, hung it in my office." I laughed. "That's incredible. That's survival." She looked at me, something shifting in her expression. "You're not as lost as you think, Marcus. You just haven't figured out what you want yet." We talked until 1 a.m. when the waitress finally kicked us out. In the parking lot, under the flickering diner sign, Elena paused before getting in her truck. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think whoever you were before your marriage, he's still in there somewhere." She drove away, tail lights disappearing down the highway. I walked back to my motel room and sat on the edge of the bed. The room was quiet. The silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. For the first time since discovering Catherine's affair, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like someone standing at the edge of something. Not an ending, but a beginning I hadn't earned yet. But maybe that was okay. Maybe you don't have to earn the beginning. Maybe you just have to show up. 1 month later, I signed the divorce papers. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Catherine and I sat across from each other in a conference room that smelled like leather and finality. Our lawyers exchanged documents. We signed where they told us to sign. 14 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of papers and a notary stamp. When it was done, Catherine looked at me for a long moment. I thought she might say something, an apology, an explanation, a farewell. But she just nodded once, gathered her things, and walked out. I sat there for another minute, pen still in my hand, wondering why I didn't feel worse. The drive home took me through hill country. I wasn't planning on taking Highway 71, but somehow that's where I ended up. Same stretch of road where everything had started. Same limestone cliffs and cedar groves rolling past my windows. I was thinking about Elena when the dashboard lit up. The engine sputtered. The check engine light flashed. The car made a sound like it was choking on something, and I barely had time to pull onto the shoulder before the whole thing died. I sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, and laughed. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. I popped the hood and stared at the engine like it might explain itself. It didn't. I still knew nothing about cars, a fact that embarrassed me slightly, less than it had 2 months ago, but only slightly. My phone was fully charged this time. I called roadside assistance, gave them my location, and waited. The sun was setting over the hill country, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I leaned against my dead BMW and watched the colors change, thinking about the last time I'd stood on this shoulder. Different man, different life, same stretch of highway. 20 minutes later, a familiar white truck appeared on the horizon. I started laughing before it even stopped. Elena stepped out, took one look at me in my dead car, and shook her head. "Either your car hates you," she said, "or it's trying to tell you something. I'm starting to think it's the latter." She walked over, peered under the hood, and made a sound that wasn't encouraging. "Alternator's dead. You're not driving this anywhere tonight." She straightened up, wiping her hands on her coveralls. "I'll tow it back to the shop. You can ride with me." I climbed into the passenger seat of her truck, and we drove back toward Austin as the sky turned from purple to black. The cab smelled like motor oil and something faintly floral. Her shampoo, maybe. Classic rock played softly on the radio. Neither of us spoke for the first few miles. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people don't need to fill the space between them. Elena's garage was different at night. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Tools hung in neat rows along the walls. The vintage motorcycle, burgundy and chrome, gleamed in the corner like a promise waiting to be kept. She got to work on my car while I sat on a metal stool, watching her move with that same easy competence I'd noticed the first day we met. Her hands were sure and steady. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she didn't need anyone's help to do it. "So," she said, not looking up from the engine, "divorce is final? Signed the papers this afternoon. How do you feel?" I thought about it. Lighter. Which probably makes me a terrible person. It makes you honest. She tightened something with a wrench. Most people lie to themselves for years after a divorce. Tell themselves they're devastated when really they're relieved. You're just skipping the performance. The radio switched to something slower. Fleetwood Mac, maybe. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Depends on what it is." "That first day on the highway, what you said about taking me for a ride." I paused, searching for the right words. "What did you mean?" Elena stopped working. She straightened up, wiped her hands on a rag, and looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes. "I meant I saw someone worth knowing," she said. "Most people don't stop long enough to be seen. They're too busy performing, too busy pretending everything's fine. But you..." She tilted her head slightly. "You looked like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be real." The words landed somewhere deep in my chest. "I had," I admitted. "Forgotten, I mean. I don't think I'd been real with anyone in years, including myself." Elena nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. Then she picked up a different wrench and tossed it to me. I caught it clumsily. "First lesson," she said. "Everyone should know how to fix what's broken. Come here." She spent the next 20 minutes showing me how to check connections, tighten bolts, identify the parts that mattered. Her hands guided mine when I fumbled. She was patient without being condescending, direct without being harsh. By midnight, the car was running again. Elena wrote up an invoice, slid it across the counter. I looked at the total, $0. At the bottom in her handwriting, she'd written, "Labor, free. Reason, you actually listened." I looked at her. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, that half smile playing at her lips. "That offer to take me for a ride," I said, "does it still stand?" She glanced at my left hand. Bare now, the tan line almost faded. I don't see a ring anymore. The motorcycle was a 1978 Honda CB750, burgundy and chrome, restored to perfection. Elena had done the work herself, rebuilt the engine, repainted the tank, replaced every part that needed replacing. "This bike saved me," she said, handing me a helmet. "After Derek, after everything. When I needed to remember who I was, I'd get on this thing and ride until I couldn't think anymore." I turned the helmet over in my hands. "I've never been on a motorcycle." "Then hold on," she said, climbing on, "and don't overthink it." I climbed on behind her, wrapped my arms around her waist. She kicked the engine to life, and the bike roared beneath us. Then we were moving. The night air was cool against my skin. The road wound through hill country, limestone cliffs rising on either side, cedar groves flashing past in the darkness. The headlight carved a path through the black, and the world narrowed to the sound of the engine, the feel of the wind, the warmth of Elena's back against my chest. I don't know how long we rode. Time didn't matter out there. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't thinking about work or Catherine or quarterly reports or any of the things that had consumed my life for 14 years. I was just there, present, alive. We stopped at an overlook above the city. Austin glowed in the distance, a sprawl of lights stretching toward the horizon. The sky was clear, stars scattered overhead, like someone had spilled them there. I climbed off the bike, legs unsteady, heart pounding. "This is what living feels like," Elena said, standing beside me. "You just forgot." I turned to look at her. The moonlight caught her face, softened the edges, made her look like someone from a dream I'd forgotten I had. She was looking at me too. Not with pity, not with expectation. Just recognition, like she saw the person I was becoming, not the one I used to be. I didn't kiss her. That wasn't what the moment was for, but I knew, standing there on that overlook, that something had changed, something that couldn't be unchanged. 6 months passed. I sold the house in Zilker, the craftsman with the exposed brick and the string lights we never turned on. I moved into a smaller place near the lake, less impressive, more mine. I still worked in marketing, but I'd cut my hours, stepped back from the clients and the dinners and the endless chase for something I'd never really wanted in the first place. Weekends I spent at Elena's garage. She taught me how to change oil, replace brake pads, rebuild a carburetor. My hands were calloused now, stained with grease that never quite washed off. I'd gone from a man who couldn't change a tire to someone who could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone. Elena and I weren't rushing anything. We were building something slow, honest, rooted in the kind of mutual respect you can't fake. She still called me flat tire guy sometimes. I pretended to be annoyed. One evening while we were closing up the shop, she said, "I've been thinking about taking a trip. Big Bend, a week on the bike, camping under the stars." She looked at me, that familiar half smile on her lips. "Think you can keep up?" I hadn't taken a real vacation in a decade, hadn't done anything that wasn't carefully scheduled, meticulously planned, designed to impress someone who wasn't paying attention anyway. "I can keep up," I said. We rode through desert highways and mountain passes, slept in roadside motels with neon signs and thin walls, ate at diners where nobody knew us and nobody cared. Elena made me fix a flat on the motorcycle one afternoon somewhere in the middle of nowhere. She stood back and watched, arms crossed, while I worked through it myself. When I finished, she nodded once, the highest praise she'd ever give. The final night we camped in Big Bend. The stars were impossibly bright, scattered across a sky so vast it made you feel small and infinite at the same time. We built a fire and sat beside it, watching the flames dance. I never thought a flat tire would save my life, I said. Elena looked at me, firelight flickering in her eyes. It didn't, she said. You just finally decided to stop running on empty. I thought about the man I'd been a year ago, hollow, invisible, sleepwalking through a life I didn't recognize, waiting for someone to come fix what was broken. I hadn't needed someone to rescue me. I'd needed someone to remind me I was worth rescuing. Elena didn't save me. She just showed up at the right moment, said the right thing, and let me do the rest. People ask me sometimes when I knew things were going to be okay. And I always think back to that first day on Highway 71, 98 degrees, phone dying. Standing on the side of the road, feeling like my whole life was a flat tire I didn't know how to fix. Elena pulled up in that white truck, and she didn't see a failure. She didn't see a man whose marriage was falling apart or a husband who hadn't been touched in months. She saw someone worth knowing. That's the thing about breakdowns. They force you to stop. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone shows up who reminds you that the road doesn't end just because you're stuck on the shoulder. Sometimes the breakdowns in life aren't obstacles, they're invitations. You just have to be willing to pull over and see who shows up.